In a world driven by competition and ambition, success doesn't always come from honest efforts. Sometimes, behind the glow of achievement, lies betrayal, manipulation, and decisions that can change everything. Ethan Riley, the founder of a top tech company, has gone through a journey he never imagined. An old enemy, once thought defeated, is now back, ready to destroy everything Ethan has built. But this time, things are different. Welcome to a story of betrayal, revenge, and the ruthless battles fought in the world of power and schemes. Will Ethan face his greatest enemy and triumph once more? Let's dive into this story. Ethan Knight had always prided himself on the life he had built. He was a successful tech entrepreneur, renowned for his groundbreaking innovations in artificial intelligence. His company, Nexus Tech, had grown exponentially, and with it, his wealth and influence. But none of his success could have prepared him for the night he came home to find his life torn apart. It had been a long flight back from Tokyo, a business trip that stretched far too long. As he entered his luxurious penthouse apartment in downtown Los Angeles, something felt off. The air was thick with an unfamiliar fragrance, a sweet, floral scent that didn't belong. His gaze shifted instinctively around the room, noticing subtle changes, a half-empty wine glass on the coffee table, a misplaced book on the bookshelf, and the faint noise of a phone ringing from the bedroom. Ethan's heart sank as he approached the door to the master suite. The soft sound of hushed voices reached his ears. Slowly, he pushed the door open, and there she was, his wife, Lily Knight, talking on the phone. Her face flushed as she quickly hung up and turned to face him. But it wasn't just the nervousness in her expression that made Ethan's stomach churn. It was the guilt in her eyes. The betrayal he had feared was now undeniable. "Who were you talking to?" Ethan's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of 1,000 questions. Lily's face paled. She tried to speak, but the words got caught in her throat. Ethan's eyes flickered to the phone she was trying to hide behind her back. It wasn't the phone that gave it away, though, it was the familiar name on the screen. Julian Thompson. Ethan's business rival. Someone he had known for years. He had never suspected Lily would betray him, not in a million years. But in that instant, it was all too clear. Julian Thompson wasn't just a business adversary, he was now something far worse. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the discovery pressing down on him. His entire life, built on trust, had just been shattered in one cruel moment. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was professional. Julian Thompson, who had always been an elusive figure in the business world, had crossed a line. Determined to take control of the situation, Ethan immediately reached out to his old friend, Henry Alvarez, a cybersecurity genius who had helped him build Nexus Tech's secure network. Ethan needed to gather evidence, not just to confront Lily, but to ensure Julian would never be a threat to him or his company again. Henry agreed to help and set to work installing surveillance systems in the apartment, discreet cameras in the most intimate corners. Ethan knew the only way to truly understand the scope of the betrayal was to have irrefutable proof. It wasn't just about catching Lily in the act. It was about exposing the full extent of the conspiracy. Along with Henry, Ethan reached out to a private investigator, Sarah King, someone he knew would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. Sarah was a no-nonsense professional, and Ethan knew she was the only one who could gather the dirt on Julian that would destroy him. Over the next several weeks, Ethan observed from a distance, watching Lily's every move through the cameras that now monitored their home. He watched her as she spoke to Julian late into the night, exchanged cryptic text messages, and met him under the cover of darkness at expensive restaurants. It became clear that their affair wasn't just a passing fling, it was a well-orchestrated plot to bring down everything Ethan had worked for. Sarah dug deeper into Julian's life. What she uncovered was even more damning than Ethan could have imagined. Julian Thompson wasn't just having an affair with Lily, he was involved in several illegal business dealings, including embezzlement, insider trading, and a series of high-profile financial crimes. Julian had been laundering money through dummy companies for years, using his relationship with Lily to manipulate Ethan's business dealings for his own gain. One night, as Ethan reviewed the surveillance footage, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. Lily had been actively helping Julian sabotage Ethan's company. She had been leaking sensitive information, guiding him through corporate strategies that Ethan had worked tirelessly to build. It was a double betrayal, one of love, and one of business. With the pieces in place, Ethan knew what he had to do. The plan wasn't just about revenge, it was about taking back control of his life and his company. But to do that, he needed to be careful. Every move had to be calculated. And there was no turning back now. It was a cold, rainy evening when Ethan decided to confront Lily. He had the evidence, the proof he needed. His hands trembled as he held the folder containing the financial documents, the text messages, and the photos of her with Julian. It was all their undeniable, unbreakable proof of her betrayal. When Lily walked into the living room, she could sense the shift in the atmosphere. The tension was thick. Ethan didn't wait for her to speak. He placed the folder on the coffee table, letting her see the photographs of her with Julian, the messages between them, and the incriminating emails she had sent to Julian, sabotaging Nexus Tech. Lily gasped. Ethan, don't, Ethan interrupted. Don't try to explain. I know everything. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, Lily seemed to shrink under the weight of her actions. But Ethan wasn't done. He pulled out the divorce papers from his jacket pocket and placed them on the table in front of her. This is over, Lily, he said, his voice firm and unwavering. You've made your choice, and now, I'm making mine. Ethan wasn't just going to let Julian get away with this. He had proof of everything, Lily's betrayal, Julian's illegal activities, and the corporate espionage he had conducted over the years. With the help of Sarah, he compiled a dossier that would ruin Julian's career. Ethan knew the best way to destroy Julian was to hit him where it hurt the most, in public. He called a press conference, one that would air all the dirty secrets. The evidence would be presented to the world, and Julian's empire would come crashing down. As the cameras rolled, Ethan walked into the conference room, his face a mask of composure. He presented the dossier, exposing Julian's illegal dealings, his manipulation of business partners, and his affair with Lily. Julian's face turned pale as Ethan laid everything bare. The fallout was immediate. Julian Thompson was arrested, his company seized, and his reputation destroyed. Lily, once the perfect image of the doting wife, found herself humiliated and alone. The public turned against her, and her association with Julian destroyed her standing in society. Ethan, however, emerged stronger. His company, Nexus Tech, not only survived the ordeal but thrived as his competitors crumbled. He had reclaimed his reputation and his peace of mind. As the dust settled, Ethan began to rebuild his life. But there was still one thing left to do. Julian might have lost everything, but Ethan knew he wasn't done. Not yet. His story wasn't over. And neither was the war. After the dust had settled, Ethan found himself walking a fine line between rebuilding his personal life and reclaiming his business empire. He had weathered the storm of betrayal, but the emotional scars lingered. The house felt emptier without Lily. The walls, once filled with laughter and shared moments, now echoed with silence. He had won the battle, but the war was far from over. As time passed, Ethan began to focus on his company again. Nexus Tech was on the brink of something groundbreaking, but it needed a new direction. With Julian and his associates out of the picture, the industry was ripe for a fresh approach. However, Ethan couldn't ignore the deeper issues still lurking beneath the surface, issues that were more complex than just business. In the months that followed, Ethan began to lean on a new group of people. He had a handful of trusted colleagues, but there was one person in particular who stood out, Gabriella Thompson, Julian's ex-wife. Gabriella had been a silent observer throughout the entire ordeal. Though she had been hurt by Julian's actions and their messy divorce, she had never once tried to interfere in Ethan's business. But after the press conference, after seeing how everything had unraveled for Julian, Gabriella reached out to Ethan. "I know what Julian did to you," she said, her voice full of understanding. "And I know you must feel betrayed not just by him, but by Lily too. But I also know this. What happened between you and Julian doesn't have to define the rest of your life. You've built something extraordinary, Ethan. You don't have to let him win. Not anymore." Gabriella had the business acumen, the drive, and the experience that Ethan needed to take Nexus Tech to the next level. After a few conversations, they began working together. She brought a fresh perspective and a vision for the future that Ethan could get behind. They formed an alliance, one that, in time, would grow into something more than just professional. But there were still lingering questions. Julian's fall from grace hadn't just affected him, it had cast a shadow over the business world, and people were talking. Ethan's enemies were still out there, waiting for an opportunity to strike. And there were whispers about Lily's next move. She hadn't completely disappeared from the scene. She was in hiding for now, but she wasn't one to stay down for long. Weeks after the press conference, Ethan received an anonymous message. The note was simple, written in black ink, "This isn't over." It was brief, but the message sent a shiver down his spine. The note didn't indicate who it was from, but Ethan suspected it had something to do with Lily. She had always been calculating, and her pride wouldn't let her be defeated so easily. Ethan knew she wasn't the type to take a loss without trying to regain her power. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Ethan enlisted the help of Sarah King again. The private investigator had been invaluable in exposing Julian's criminal dealings, and now, she was tasked with finding out who was behind the cryptic message. Ethan sat in his office, waiting for Sarah's report. Gabriella, who had become a trusted partner in both business and personal matters, walked in with a steaming cup of coffee. Her presence was soothing, a sharp contrast to the anxiety that had been building inside him. "Everything okay?" Gabriella asked, her tone gentle yet probing. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know. I just got this note. Someone is out there, someone who thinks they can still control the narrative. But I won't let that happen. I won't let them win." Gabriella nodded thoughtfully. "You've come this far. But you need to be careful. Sometimes, people who've lost everything can be the most dangerous." Ethan knew she was right. He had to remain vigilant. But he also knew that if he wanted to move forward, he needed to face whatever was coming, head-on. That night, Sarah called with an update. The message had been traced back to a burner phone, but there was something odd about it. No one had used it recently. It was as though it had been planted for him to find. This made Ethan uneasy. Who was playing games with him, and why now? A few days later, Ethan was summoned to a high-stakes meeting with the remaining stakeholders in Nexus Tech. Some were longtime allies, others, however, had been circling like vultures, waiting for the opportunity to take control after the chaos caused by Julian's downfall. Gabriella, ever the strategist, had warned him about the risks. Some people will try to exploit your vulnerabilities. The moment they see a crack, they'll try to widen it. Ethan sat at the head of the table, his mind sharp despite the unease gnawing at him. The boardroom was tense, and he could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on him. The meeting was going as planned until one of the major investors, Howard Daniels, dropped a bombshell. "We've been seeing irregularities in the company's projections," Howard said, his voice cool and authoritative. "It seems the financials you've presented don't align with our expectations. We may need to reconsider your leadership, Ethan." For a moment, the room went silent. Ethan's heart raced, but he didn't show it. He had anticipated something like this. "Let me remind you all," Ethan began, his voice calm but filled with intensity, "that Nexus Tech is the backbone of this industry. It was built from the ground up, through hard work, innovation, and integrity. If you want to undermine that, then go ahead. But you'll be destroying the very thing that's made us all successful." The room remained still, the tension palpable. Ethan knew the truth, Nexus Tech was his, and he wouldn't let it fall without a fight. But he also knew there was someone behind the scenes, someone with an agenda. And as long as they were out there, he couldn't afford to relax. The following week, a series of leaks began to circulate in the media. Private emails from Ethan and Gabriella were exposed, twisted into scandalous headlines. The leaks painted Ethan as a power-hungry, ruthless businessman who had manipulated Gabriella into taking over Nexus Tech. It was obvious that someone was framing them, someone with access to the company's sensitive information. But who? The answer came when Sarah uncovered the unthinkable. The leaks were being orchestrated by none other than Lily herself. She had secretly been working with a small faction of Nexus Tech's board members, plotting to undermine Ethan's leadership and take control of the company. It was the final betrayal, and Ethan knew that he could no longer stay passive. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. The weight of the situation was heavy, but he knew he couldn't afford to falter now. Lily's betrayal had taken him by surprise, but the fact that she had allied with a faction of Nexus Tech as board members to destroy him was the final straw. It was time to act, and this time, he would be the one controlling the narrative. He had built Nexus Tech from the ground up, and no one, least of all his estranged wife, was going to take it from him. He needed to find out exactly who was working with her, and who could be trusted to stand by him as the storm continued to build. "Sarah," Ethan called, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "I need you to dig deeper. Get into the financials, the board members' histories, anything that could link them to Lily or Julian. We need to expose everyone involved in this conspiracy. This isn't just a business takeover. This is personal." Sarah had been with him through the most difficult parts of the battle, and Ethan knew she was the right person for this. She had the skills, the knowledge, and the relentless drive to uncover the truth, no matter how deep it ran. As Sarah set to work, Ethan knew he needed to prepare for the next phase. His public image had already taken a hit with the media leaks, but there was still one thing he could control: his response. The media might have twisted the facts, but if he acted decisively, he could turn the narrative around. The media frenzy surrounding the leaks was at an all-time high. Headlines blared accusations against Ethan and Gabriella, painting them as the masterminds behind a corporate coup. Every day brought a new scandal, a new twist. But Ethan wasn't going to sit back and let others dictate his future. He called an emergency press conference, something that would take control of the situation and force the public to listen to his side. Gabriella stood beside him, her expression calm but determined. "Thank you for joining us today," Ethan began, his voice cutting through the noise of the gathered reporters. "I know there have been many rumors and accusations circulating. Let me be clear, these leaks, these lies, are nothing more than a smear campaign orchestrated by those who want to see Nexus Tech crumble. They want to see me fail. But I'm here to tell you that's not going to happen." The room fell silent as Ethan continued, detailing the evidence of the conspiracy against him, without directly naming anyone. Instead, he focused on the facts, the false rumors, the financial manipulations, and the coordinated attacks from the inside. "We are going to get to the bottom of this. And when we do, those responsible will be held accountable." The press conference was a resounding success. Ethan had taken control of the narrative, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. But he knew this was only the beginning. The real battle was just starting, and he couldn't afford to drop his guard. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure continued to mount. Sarah's investigation had uncovered key details about Lily's involvement with Nexus Tech as rogue board members. She had been working closely with a man named Victor Hawk, one of the company's largest investors, who had long resented Ethan's leadership. Victor had quietly been funneling money into a shell company that had been acquiring shares of Nexus Tech, all while secretly pushing for Ethan's removal. Ethan had suspected there was someone else behind the scenes, but learning that Victor Hawk was one of the key players in the scheme took him by surprise. Victor had been in the business for years, but he had always stayed in the background, quietly pulling strings. Now, it seemed, he was ready to make his move. Ethan's mind raced as he began to piece everything together. Victor, Lily, and a few other board members had been working together, manipulating the stock market and engineering internal turmoil to destabilize Nexus Tech. They had used Lily as a pawn, leveraging her relationship with Ethan to gain access to sensitive information and create chaos. It was a well-orchestrated attack, and the clock was ticking down to a final confrontation. He needed to act fast. With Sarah's findings in hand, Ethan planned his next move carefully. He knew that confronting Victor Hawk in the public eye would be too risky. He had to expose him in a way that would ensure there were no escape routes. The legal system, he knew, was his best weapon. Ethan reached out to a lawyer he had worked with in the past, a man named Jacob Steele. Jacob was known for his aggressive tactics and his ability to win cases that seemed impossible. Ethan needed someone who could take the evidence Sarah had uncovered and turn it into a legal strategy that would dismantle Victor's entire operation. Together, they developed a plan. Ethan would file a lawsuit against Victor Hawk and the other rogue board members for corporate sabotage, fraud, and conspiracy. At the same time, they would leak the story to the media, ensuring that every angle of the plot was exposed. They needed to strike when the iron was hot. It was time to turn the tables on those who thought they could bring him down. Ethan was no longer the one hiding in the shadows, he was the one in control. The court case was set. The media was already buzzing with rumors about Nexus Tech's internal crisis, and Ethan knew this was his chance to make the final move. As he sat in the courtroom, surrounded by his legal team, his mind was sharp and focused. This was the moment that would decide his future. Victor Hawk sat across from him, his face a mask of confidence, but Ethan could see the fear behind his eyes. Victor had underestimated him. He thought Ethan was just a businessman, someone who could be manipulated and discarded. What he didn't realize was that Ethan was a fighter, one who had been through too much to let his enemies win. The trial was intense, with both sides presenting their evidence. But it was the testimony from Sarah and Jacob that would ultimately tip the scales. Their evidence was undeniable, and the jury saw it for what it was, a calculated attempt to destroy a company and a man's life. When the verdict was read, Ethan felt a surge of relief. Victor Hawk was found guilty of corporate fraud and conspiracy. The board members who had aligned with him were also held accountable. As for Lily, she disappeared from the public eye, her reputation in ruins. With Victor and the rogue board members out of the picture, Ethan took control of Nexus Tech once again. The company, though battered, was stronger than ever. He had weathered the storm, and now it was time to rebuild. Gabriella stood by his side as they navigated the next chapter of their business relationship. What had started as a professional partnership had blossomed into something deeper, something Ethan hadn't expected. But in the chaos of betrayal, he had found someone he could trust, someone who had helped him see the bigger picture. Though the scars of betrayal remained, Ethan had learned one invaluable lesson: trust was not given lightly, but earned through action. And now, he was ready for whatever came next. Despite the legal victory and the restoration of his company, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that peace was fleeting. Nexus Tech was on a solid path toward recovery, but Ethan knew all too well how quickly things could change. There were still forces at play, unseen hands that could strike when least expected. It had been several months since the trial, and Ethan had been taking a more hands-on approach to rebuilding Nexus Tech. He had implemented stricter internal security measures to ensure there were no more leaks or backstabbing from within the company. But as he sat in his office late one evening, reviewing the latest quarterly reports, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message that caught his attention. "We haven't forgotten about you. The game isn't over." His heart skipped a beat. The sender was unknown, but the message was chillingly familiar. Whoever this was, they knew about the chaos Ethan had just endured, and it seemed they were still lurking in the shadows, waiting for their moment. Gabriella had been a great ally throughout this process, but she too seemed uneasy. Despite their growing relationship, there was a lingering tension between them. Both of them knew that the business world was cutthroat, and that alliances could shift just as quickly as the tides. "Another message," Ethan muttered as he showed the text to Gabriella. "I'm not sure who it is, but they're playing games again." Gabriella furrowed her brow, her eyes narrowing. It could be anyone. A disgruntled former employee, a rival trying to capitalize on the turmoil. Or worse, someone trying to reclaim the pieces they lost when Julian and Victor fell. "I know," Ethan said, standing up and walking over to the window. The city lights below reflected his mood, flickering and uncertain. "But whoever this is, they're not going to stop until they've gotten what they want. I need to get ahead of this." Gabriella placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him. "We'll figure it out. But we need to be smart about it. Let's not go in blind this time." Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. It was clear that this wasn't over. The stakes had only gotten higher. Ethan knew he had to dig deeper into the message, so he called in Sarah to investigate. Her skills had proven invaluable before, and now, more than ever, he needed her sharp mind to track down the source of the message. Sarah worked tirelessly, running forensic analyses on the encrypted text. The information was sparse, but after a few days of relentless digging, she uncovered a pattern. The message had been routed through several proxy servers, making it difficult to trace, but Sarah had managed to pinpoint one small lead, a name, Marcus Howard. The name meant nothing to Ethan at first, but Sarah quickly connected the dots. Marcus Howard had once been an executive at Nexus Tech before being quietly let go under questionable circumstances. He had been involved in a few shady dealings, risky business moves that had nearly sunk the company years ago. Ethan had no doubt that this was no coincidence. "Marcus Howard," Ethan muttered under his breath, the name lingering in the air. He's got a grudge. He's been lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity. Gabriella leaned forward, her brow furrowed in thought. How does he have the resources to do this? He doesn't have any real power left. That's the thing. He's got allies. I'm sure of it. A network of people just waiting to strike when the time is right. Ethan replied, his voice steady but tense. Sarah's findings only confirmed their suspicions. Marcus had quietly been reassembling a network of disgruntled former employees, rival CEOs, and investors who had a vested interest in bringing Ethan down. They were all linked through a web of shell companies and hidden accounts. This was no longer just about business, it was personal. As the days passed, the tension grew. Ethan knew the walls were closing in, but he also realized that he couldn't afford to retreat. He had come too far. Nexus Tech, his company, his legacy, he couldn't let it all slip away again. Ethan and Gabriella took more precautions. They bolstered their security measures, hired more private investigators, and kept a close eye on the board members. Every day, it seemed like someone new was trying to undermine his position, subtle moves, underhanded tactics, whispers in the halls. But Ethan was ready. He had faced betrayal before, and he was determined not to let history repeat itself. Then, it happened. At a quarterly shareholder meeting, a new voice entered the conversation. Marcus Howard had somehow made his way onto the speaker list, despite being publicly out of the picture for years. With a smug grin, he presented a series of questionable, financial irregularities that he claimed were evidence of Ethan's incompetence. This company is being run into the ground, Marcus declared, his eyes gleaming. And it's time we consider a new direction, one that doesn't involve the reckless leadership of Mr. Ethan Riley. The room fell silent as Marcus's accusation hung in the air. Ethan's mind raced. It was a move straight out of Julian's playbook. He was trying to take control, again. But this time, Ethan was prepared. Marcus, you have a lot of nerve standing here and accusing me of something I've spent years working to fix, Ethan said, his voice cold but unwavering. You and your cronies have been playing the long game, haven't you? Trying to exploit Nexus Tech's weaknesses for your own gain. The tension in the room thickened as Ethan laid out his own evidence, proof that Marcus had been manipulating the company's stock through underhanded means, using his network to quietly sell off shares and orchestrate a hostile takeover attempt. The shareholders were stunned. Marcus had miscalculated. His plan had been exposed, and now the tables were turned. Ethan had the upper hand. The confrontation at the shareholder meeting was just the beginning. Ethan knew that Marcus wouldn't go down without a fight. In the days that followed, Marcus continued to pull strings from the shadows, trying to discredit Ethan and undermine Nexus Tech's credibility. But Ethan had no intention of letting Marcus, or anyone else, win. He hired a top-tier legal team and began to dismantle Marcus's operations, piece by piece. Sarah worked tirelessly to track down every lead, uncovering more of Marcus's hidden financial dealings and connections. The final blow came when Ethan orchestrated a surprise move. Using the full weight of Nexus Tech's resources, he exposed Marcus's illegal activities to the public in a stunning press release. The media was quick to pick up the story, and soon, the authorities were involved. Marcus was arrested on charges of corporate espionage, fraud, and conspiracy. In the aftermath, Nexus Tech emerged stronger than ever. The rogue elements had been purged, and the company was now free from the threat of internal sabotage. Ethan had won, but at a cost. He had sacrificed much in the pursuit of justice, and the scars from the battles were still fresh. Ethan stood at the edge of the balcony, looking out over the city. The skyline shimmered with the promise of a new day, but the memories of the past still lingered in the back of his mind. Nexus Tech had survived, but so much had changed. His relationships, his sense of trust, even his own identity, all had been tested. Beside him stood Gabriella. Their bond had grown deeper over the past few months, forged in the fires of betrayal and ambition. Together, they had weathered the storm ready for the next chapter. Gabriella asked, her voice soft. Ethan turned to face her, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Ready. But we'll take it one step at a time. There's still a long road ahead. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan felt a sense of peace wash over him. The battle for his company, his life, and his future had been long and brutal. But it had led him here, to a place where he was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to move forward. And whatever came next, Ethan Riley was ready to face it head-on. Just as Ethan had started to believe that peace might finally be within reach, a sudden development rattled him to the core. One morning, as he sat at his desk reviewing company projections, a name he thought he'd never hear again flashed across his phone screen: Julian Devereux. It had been over a year since Julian's arrest, and Ethan had assumed he was rotting in a prison cell somewhere, far from causing trouble. But apparently, he had other plans. The message was simple but chilling: "You haven't seen the last of me. I'm coming for you, Ethan." Ethan's heart sank. He had beaten Julian before, but the thought of him escaping, or worse, being released, stirred a feeling of unease. Could Julian really have gotten out? Or was this another mind game, designed to distract him from his next move? He had already dealt with so many enemies, but Julian was different. His ability to manipulate and destroy was unmatched. Ethan had no idea how Julian had managed to slip through the cracks, but one thing was clear: this battle was far from over. Sarah worked tirelessly to uncover how Julian had resurfaced. Through her network of informants and surveillance systems, she discovered something that made Ethan's blood run cold. Julian hadn't escaped; he had been released early from prison due to a technicality in his trial. It seemed the system had failed, and now Julian was free, more dangerous than ever. But what chilled Ethan even more was the fact that Julian had allies. While incarcerated, he had been quietly rebuilding his network, making new connections with influential figures who had the power to destroy Nexus Tech once and for all. "He's more dangerous than we thought," Sarah said, presenting the findings. "He's not just going after you, he's targeting everything you've built. And he's got the resources to make it happen." Ethan couldn't deny the truth of Sarah's words. Julian had never been just a simple rival; he was a master manipulator, capable of using anything and anyone to get what he wanted. And now, with a network of powerful people behind him, he was more than a threat. He was a ticking time bomb. Ethan met with Gabriella later that day, his thoughts swirling. They had won before, but could they really do it again? "Do you think he's capable of destroying Nexus Tech this time?" Gabriella asked quietly, studying his face. Ethan took a deep breath. "He's already tried before, and we stopped him. But now, he has more power, more influence. And we have to be prepared for the worst." Ethan knew he couldn't just sit back and wait for Julian to make his move. The best way to fight someone like him was to get ahead of the game. He needed to be proactive, to anticipate Julian's every move. The first step was to shore up Nexus Tech's defenses. The company had grown since his earlier battles, and it was important to ensure that the people closest to him were still trustworthy. Ethan reached out to his old team, Sarah, Gabriella, and even Tim, to devise a plan to counter Julian's attack. He also hired a new security detail to monitor the company's internal network and keep a close watch on Julian's activities. Meanwhile, Gabriella's role became even more critical. She wasn't just a partner anymore; she was his second-in-command, someone he could trust without question. Together, they began preparing for a counteroffensive, knowing that Julian's next move would be swift and calculated. As the days passed, Ethan found himself unable to focus on anything except the looming threat of Julian. He knew that this time, he would need more than just strategy. He needed to become a different person, someone who could outsmart Julian and beat him at his own game. It wasn't long before Julian made his move. Nexus Tech's stock prices dropped unexpectedly, and rumors began to circulate about internal conflicts within the company. Anonymous leaks flooded the press, suggesting that Ethan was involved in shady dealings, and that the company was on the verge of collapse. Ethan knew immediately that this was no accident. Julian had been working behind the scenes, manipulating the market, feeding false information to the media, and creating chaos. It was a classic Julian move, one designed to destabilize everything Ethan had worked for. But this time, Ethan was ready. He had been preparing for the worst, and now it was time to take control. Using his resources, he quickly gathered information to trace the source of the leaks. Sarah worked with the tech team to track the origin of the anonymous communications, and soon, they discovered a shocking truth. The leaks were coming from within the company, from a few trusted employees who had been corrupted by Julian's influence. One name stood out above the rest, Lucas Grant, a mid-level executive who had worked with Ethan for years. Ethan had always trusted him, but now it seemed that Lucas had been secretly working with Julian all along. Ethan didn't hesitate. He called a meeting with his legal team and set in motion a plan to confront Lucas head-on. He knew this was the final showdown, the one that would determine not only the future of Nexus Tech but his own future as well. The confrontation with Lucas was everything Ethan had feared. Lucas denied everything, of course. But the evidence was undeniable. Lucas had been funneling information to Julian, feeding him insider details about the company's operations, and actively sabotaging Nexus Tech's internal workings. "Why, Lucas?" Ethan asked, his voice steady, though the betrayal cut deep. "Why would you do this?" Lucas seemed unrepentant, his eyes cold. "You think you can control everything, Ethan. But the world doesn't work that way. Julian knows how to play the game. He's been waiting for the right moment to take you down, and I've just been helping him along." Ethan clenched his fists, fighting the urge to lash out. But he knew better. Julian had orchestrated this, had turned someone Ethan trusted into a weapon against him. It was a sickening reminder of just how far Julian would go to destroy him. "Get him out of here," Ethan said coldly to his security team. As Lucas was escorted out of the building, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Julian was still out there, pulling strings, waiting for the next opportunity. The game wasn't over. And Ethan knew that if he was going to win, he would have to take things to a whole new level. With the betrayal uncovered and Lucas removed from the company, Ethan focused all his energy on one thing, finding Julian before he could strike again. The time for passive defense was over. It was time to go on the offensive. Ethan and Gabriella put their heads together to come up with a strategy. They needed to get to the heart of Julian's network, expose his allies, and cut off his resources. But Julian was smart, he wouldn't go down easily. They hired a team of experts to track Julian's every move, using a combination of cyber intelligence and old-fashioned legwork. As the days passed, they closed in on his operations, revealing more about his plan to destabilize the financial markets and force Ethan to sell Nexus Tech. But Ethan was determined to fight back. He wasn't going to let Julian win. Not this time. Ethan knew that the endgame was near. He had tracked Julian to a secluded location, a place far from the prying eyes of the media. This was it, the final confrontation. The moment where he would either reclaim his life and his company or lose everything he had worked for. Gabriella, Sarah, and the rest of Ethan's trusted team stood by his side. They had all been through the fire, and now they were ready to face whatever came next. Julian, as always, had one final trick up his sleeve. He had orchestrated an elaborate trap, designed to lure Ethan into a false sense of security. But Ethan was no fool. He had learned from his past mistakes. This time, he would be the one in control. With his team by his side, Ethan walked into the den of the enemy, determined to confront Julian once and for all. Ethan and his team had meticulously planned their final confrontation with Julian. They knew the risks, but they also knew that this was the only way to truly end the cycle of manipulation, deceit, and betrayal that Julian had spun around them for so long. The meeting was set to take place at an old industrial complex on the outskirts of the city, a place Julian had once used for covert meetings during his rise in the business world. It was a place where secrets were exchanged, alliances were formed in the shadows, and lives could be ruined in an instant. Ethan, Gabriella, Sarah, and their security detail arrived at the location, keeping a close watch on every corner. Julian had a way of making everything feel like a game of chess, where he always seemed to be a few steps ahead. But this time, Ethan wasn't going to let him control the board. They entered the building cautiously, every step a reminder of the stakes at hand. As they navigated through the darkened hallways, the tension was palpable. But there was something else in the air, something that felt like the calm before a storm. At the center of the building, in a large, open room, they found Julian. He was standing alone, his back to them, as if he had been waiting for this moment. His sharp suit and confident stance made it clear that he hadn't come to beg for mercy. Julian was still playing his game, as always. "I knew you'd come," Julian said, his voice echoing off the empty walls. But it's too late. I've already won. Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady and resolute. You've lost, Julian. This ends tonight. Julian chuckled, turning to face him. You think you've beaten me? You think you've won because you exposed my little schemes? He smirked, his eyes gleaming with arrogance. No, Ethan. You just played right into my hands. You see, the game isn't over until I say it is. Before Ethan could respond, Julian activated a device in his hand. A screen flickered to life, showing the real-time movements of several members of Ethan's board of directors, people he thought he could trust. They were in private meetings with various competitors, discussing ways to undermine Nexus Tech and weaken Ethan's position. Julian had been working behind the scenes all along, exploiting every weakness, playing both sides. Ethan's jaw clenched. He had known that Julian had influence, but seeing it laid out so openly was a hard blow. It felt as if every step Ethan had taken to rebuild Nexus Tech was now in danger of crumbling. You see, Julian continued, his voice dripping with malice, I've always been 10 moves ahead. You were too focused on the petty drama, the betrayals within your own company. But I've been orchestrating something much bigger. Nexus Tech isn't just a company, it's a symbol of everything that's wrong with this world. And now, it's my turn to bring it down. Gabriella stepped forward, her presence commanding. Not if we stop you first. With that, she motioned to Sarah and their security team, who had been ready to strike. The atmosphere shifted from one of tension to one of action. The moment had arrived. They were all in this together, no more games, no more manipulation. Julian's smug expression faltered as Ethan's team closed in. But Julian wasn't about to give up that easily. He pulled out a remote control, triggering a set of hidden defenses around the building. The lights flickered, and heavy metal doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. Think you're in control, Ethan? Julian sneered. You're just a pawn. And you always will be. But Ethan had learned from his past mistakes. As soon as the doors locked, he signaled to Gabriella, who activated the emergency override they had planted earlier. The building's security system began to glitch, and within moments, the doors began to unlock. Julian panicked, realizing too late that he had underestimated Ethan's preparation. The security system wasn't the only thing they had turned against him. Sarah had been working on something else during their investigation, an exposé of Julian's financial manipulations, carefully planned to be released the moment the confrontation began. As the security doors swung open, the first images of Julian's treachery were splashed across the screens inside the room. A live broadcast hit the airwaves, showing the world exactly who Julian Devereux truly was, a criminal mastermind, an orchestrator of fraud and corruption, a man who had used every trick in the book to climb to power. His empire of lies was crumbling before him. The authorities, alerted by Ethan's legal team and the media exposure, were already on their way. Julian's reign was officially over. In the midst of the chaos, Julian was taken into custody, his smug demeanor replaced by panic and disbelief. He had lost everything, his reputation, his wealth, and most importantly, his power. Ethan stood in the room, looking at the man who had tormented him for so long. He didn't feel the rush of victory he had expected. Instead, he felt relief that the battle was finally over, and that the damage had been contained. The days following Julian's arrest were a whirlwind. Nexus Tech's stock quickly recovered as the public learned the truth about Julian's manipulations. With the company's reputation intact and the traitors within exposed, Ethan was able to reclaim control, this time more determined than ever to steer the company in the right direction. Gabriella remained by his side, both professionally and personally. Their relationship had deepened through their shared struggle, and together, they began to plan for the future. There were still challenges ahead, but Ethan knew that with her by his side, they could face anything that came their way. Sarah, too, had become an irreplaceable ally. She had proven her loyalty and skill time and time again, and Ethan made sure to reward her hard work with a promotion within the company. She was no longer just his investigator, she was part of his core team, someone he could trust completely. As for Nexus Tech, the company began to flourish again. Ethan had learned valuable lessons from the chaos, and he was committed to ensuring that the company's growth would be built on trust, integrity, and transparency. But even as things began to settle, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the business world was never truly at peace. There would always be another challenge, another threat waiting to rise. But this time, he knew he would be ready. With a newfound sense of strength and clarity, Ethan gazed out the window of his office, watching the city below. It was a new day, a day of possibilities. And this time, he wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. Weeks later, at a grand celebration for Nexus Tech's successful recovery, Ethan found himself surrounded by his team, his friends, and his loved ones. The company was once again at the top of its game, and the challenges of the past seemed like distant memories. But Ethan knew they would never define him. He had come through the fire stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to lead his company to even greater heights. Cheers, Gabriella said, raising her glass to Ethan. To new beginnings. Ethan clinked his glass with hers, a smile tugging at his lips. To new beginnings. As the crowd cheered, Ethan couldn't help but feel that, despite all the hardships, the future was bright. The lessons learned from the past had shaped him into a leader ready to face whatever came next. And with the people he trusted by his side, there was nothing he couldn't overcome. The story of Ethan Riley was far from over. It was only just beginning. And so, Ethan Riley's journey comes to an end, at least for now. After everything he's been through, the battles fought, and the enemies vanquished, one thing is clear, the road to redemption is never easy, but it's always worth it. Ethan has learned from his past and is ready to face whatever the future holds. But is this truly the end of the story? Or will more challenges arise to test Ethan's strength and resolve? Only time will tell. Thank you for watching. What do you think will happen next? Do you think Ethan has truly won, or is there more waiting for him down the road? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss out on more thrilling twists and turns. We've got more stories coming your way, and we wouldn't want you to miss a single one.